how do I know if I should invest in a project or if I should kill a project? Like how risky is that still? Those are things that are technical that you can easily make the playbook for. What you really want to do is break this down and have evidence for the different aspects. So evidence here for desirability. Do I have evidence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for desirability? Then we go to feasibility. Do I have evidence level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? And same for viability. So it's almost that we create a scorecard for each idea. Now, to make it concrete, when a team presents, I talked to you about the Honeywell Growth Symposium, each team is not just going to present the idea, they're going to present their scorecard of evidence. And it's the scorecard of evidence that's going to give the leadership confidence. So the idea per se, you can't judge if it's good or bad. You can only judge, do we have evidence that shows it's an idea that is worth investing in? And you do this gradually. So at the beginning, you might have a 0 everywhere.
Before we start, I want to thank our sponsor, Kyndryl, who runs and reimagines the technology systems that drive advantage for the world's leading businesses. With a unique blend of AI-powered consulting built on unmatched managed service capability, Kyndryl helps leaders harness the power of technology for smarter decisions, faster innovation, and a lasting competitive edge. Don't forget, sign up for the Kyndryl Institute, where you'll find so many of the guests we've had on the Innovation Show writing bespoke pieces for the Kyndryl Institute. And by signing up and sending me a screenshot, you can be in with a chance to win a copy of the books on the show. You can find out more at Kyndryl, KYNDRYL.com. There's a nursing home and rehabilitation centre in Rhode Island called Steer House. And back in 2005, the staff adopted 6 cats. One of them was Oscar. And Oscar was not the friendly kind. He kept to himself and he hissed at you if you annoyed him. Then the staff noticed something. Oscar would pick a patient, jump up on the bed, stamp out a place beside them and curl up, and within a few hours, that patient would die. What I found most interesting is that he could tell the difference between a bad turn and the end. One family described their mother having several false alarms, and each time Oscar came in, had a look, and left again. On the last day, he paced outside the room for hours. When nobody let him in, he went into the room next door and scratched at the adjoining wall until somebody understood what he wanted. There's a science behind it. It's called necromones, biochemicals released by dying cells akin to pheromones. And what the staff did with this information is what's most interesting. They didn't argue with the cat. They rang the family so people had a chance to say goodbye. Last week, Antonio Nieto Rodriguez talked to us about killing projects. Today we're joined by the man who decides which projects get the money, and you'll notice he doesn't much like the word killing. He's the creator of the Business Model Canvas, author of the Invincible Company, Testing Business Ideas, Value Proposition Design, and CEO of Strategyzer, where he has moved the business from books to playbooks, which is something a lot of you have been asking for on the Innovation Show. He's a great friend of mine. He's a great friend of the show. Alexander Osterwalder, welcome back, sir.
Thanks for having me. Great to be back.
Always a pleasure, man. Your shows always are like rocket fuel for the Innovation Show. So it's always a pleasure to have you, man. Firstly, before we get stuck into how to kill projects, and you are the Oscar, give you the Oscars of killing projects. What have you been up to? I know the business has shifted a little bit. You've been traveling all over the world giving keynotes, but more so giving workshops and teaching companies how to actually do this work.
I'm passionate about getting people to work differently, the right way to make projects work. Because everybody's frustrated, in particular around growth projects, right? But it goes much further, new value propositions, strategy, etc. So one of the things that, I was asking myself is why? Why can't we make these things work? Because you have all these brilliant people. Organizations are complex, but we know the tools now. We know the techniques. We know the processes. So what are we doing wrong? And what I started to realize is that, we used to do e-learning. We used to do workshops. We used to do training. We do coaching, consulting, all of it. But somehow it never really took the right way. So what we started to do is put that all together in what we call playbooks. So instead of trying to teach content, do consulting, which can get very expensive, we said, well, what if we took everything we know, that works, and we move from books to playbooks? The whole idea of books is around content and coaching and consulting. Playbooks is you have an objective. What's the playbook to get there? Want a great value proposition. How do I do that? Oh, I want a great value proposition with AI. Well, how do I do that? So it's just a step-by-step approach. So we can't figure it out. A really good way of getting teams to work differently to get to results faster with all the tools and methods that are out there, right? There are a lot of great thinkers with a lot of great content. So why aren't organizations able to adopt them? So it's not just about Strategyzer tools and content. It's really like, let's turn all of this stuff into playbooks that companies will actually adopt so that we work in a better way. So that's been my passion over the last, 2 years or so. And I think we got something that works for many different domains.
I know you can't talk about a lot of the brilliant companies you work with and the successes they've had and the ability to kill projects as well. That's going to be the focus of this shorter episode. So one of the things many people who listen to the Innovation Show, many viewers on YouTube have asked for is more of this type of content, more of playbook style. So thank you for doing that for us. You're going to take us through today how to kill projects and actually really how to set them up for success in the first place.
And actually, there's some we can talk about. So when I say playbooks, we actually have two categories. We created a playbook library where anybody can get access to the playbooks we put out there, and hopefully we'll get some thinkers to put their playbooks in there. That's publicly accessible for anybody. So small teams, startup entrepreneurs, SMEs. But then we also do these custom playbooks. And the one I can talk about, we've done many of these, is for Honeywell. So we're running their growth symposiums around the world. And the idea is exactly what we're going to talk about today. Which projects do we invest in, and which projects should we change or retire? So I'll move away from the idea of killing per se, and ultimately the goal is to invest in those few that can actually work, right? So you get a real funnel, not a tunnel. So with the growth symposium, I'm just back from Shanghai 2 weeks ago. We do that in Shanghai, we do it in India, we do it in Europe, and we do it in the US. And the senior leadership team is always there to invest in the projects. So the teams get to show these projects in a very specific way. And I'll walk you a little bit through that. So I'm happy to reveal those secrets because they should be accessible to everybody, right?
I'll link to all those resources that are available on the Strategyzer website as well. But Alex is going to bring us through a few slides. For those just listening to us, this is probably going to be more difficult to grasp than a usual episode. But Alex said he'd do his best to describe this for you and let you know what's on the screen. Over to you, my man.
I'll use words to describe the visuals. So it's easier when you see the visuals, but, let's also make the slides accessible, right? Because my goal is really to get this stuff to spread. So, a couple of years ago, we worked with a consortium of businesses. There was Bosch, there was Cargill, there was Nestle. We came together to ask, how can we actually score growth projects to know which ones to invest in? So that was the initial goal. Like, how can we create metrics? Because if you can't measure it, well, you can't manage it. It's very simple. So sometimes I'm a bit, surprised how in the innovation and growth world, we don't measure that much. And we, dole out money for, things that people didn't show you the metrics. And when I say metrics, it's not an upfront business case. I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm talking about measuring the evidence that the business case could work. So how should you do this? So just quickly fundamentals. I'll go very quick. When you start with an opportunity, you can come up with a business case, but you know what? It's a fantasy. So what you really need to do is search for the right business model and value propositions. That's what we need to prove. Okay. So we can actually measure how close are we to success. And then when we're close, we start to scale. So it's this whole thing, right? We go from an idea opportunity to the real business. Now, there are two big tasks there. One, companies are really good at designing the business logic. So with these tools that you might know, like Business Model Canvas, Value Proposition Canvas, companies make business cases. But here's the problem. They invest in a business case that is a pure fantasy. What they should do is admit, we do not know if that's going to work. So we actually need to test and validate, again and again and again. And we kind of create this discipline that is evidence-based. So we design, we test, we design, we test, and that's a gradual process, okay? So that's the process. So what do we need to test and what do we need to measure? So first thing, pretty straightforward. Well, let's test if those customer needs actually exist. So it sounds trivial, but instead of going to talk to customers or run other experiments, we're going to focus, 3 weeks on a business case. That's analysis paralysis. So we tend to overthink and under-experiment. So what you want to do is you want to think for maybe a half a day, and then you go and talk to customers. Do they actually have those needs? The second thing you immediately want to do is willingness to pay. Do they have a budget? Have they purchased things like that before? So you're going to ask, what would you pay? But you start to investigate, will they pay? And you can do that either with interviews or more sophisticated experiments. Then you start to look at the benefits. Now you look at the solution. And all the way up to here, you don't need to build anything. So people say, yeah, we build MVPs, minimal viable product. Well, the problem is engineers love to build, so they build too fast. The first thing you want to do, in particular in the age of AI, is first test and validate the needs and the willingness to pay. Because we can build so fast, we tend to build first, and then we're going to build the wrong thing for 100 times. So it's better to start actually with the needs. Sounds trivial, not done, right? Common sense, not common practice. Then we go to market, and then we start to really look at feasibility. So it's a process. So you put this together, we test desirability, we show the evidence. That's what we can measure. We can measure the evidence that there is desirability. We can measure the evidence that there's feasibility. That's the easiest one, because all the engineers are going to get excited about feasibility. So this one we don't need to worry about. Companies do this well. But then viability. We need to measure the evidence that customers will pay. And sometimes companies tell me, yeah, Alex, we actually measure viability. What do? We do spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are a fantasy made explicit. They're not a metric. What you can do is measure the evidence that supports the spreadsheet. So you can say, hey, this is the customer segment. We talked to 10, we talked to 1,000, or we surveyed 1,000. 50% actually already spent on this type of solution. That's what you call measuring kind of the evidence. Okay, so now I showed you the principle. Let's look at the metrics. So when we worked with this consortium of companies, because we wanted to make it applied, we said, well, how could we measure and what do we measure so that we can apply it from B2C to B2B to government? We said, well, what we can measure is evidence. First rule is business plans and high-level market research is not evidence. It's a hint that there's a market there, but just because some big consulting firm or your internal analysis said there's a big market there, doesn't mean they're going to buy from you. It doesn't mean they have the need you're going to address. So that's not evidence yet. So what is evidence? Hey, we talked to, let's say, a couple of hundred, and we get feedback from them. Or we run, I'll show you some other experiments. That's first light evidence. We give that a score of 1, and then we can have higher scores if we actually go further and they may be pre-purchase or other experiments where it's really proof that it's the real world. Okay, so we score the evidence from 1 to 5. So let's go through this. The first 2 levels is what people say. So if I do an interview, so I'll make this concrete, okay? So if I go and talk to people, but I don't really have the solution yet, I just do an interview, it's great. It's a good start. It's low level. It's level 1. People, in B2B, they call this voice of customer. You have market research firms. That's great. That's level 1. But what you then want to do is, what if you showed them a data sheet, a storyboard that made the solution concrete? Now they react to a real thing. That's already level 2, but it's still just what they say. Oh, I love that solution. Okay, great. So they just say, and you might ask, would you buy this? Oh, yeah. But they say that doesn't mean they're going to do it. So what you want to do now is go further than just interviews, which most companies stop there and they will invest $1 million, $100 million sometimes based on interviews. Not good enough. So then you say, well, could we do a stronger experiment, slightly stronger, where there's a bit more skin in the game beyond saying? So the typical kind of thing is a landing page. You put up a landing page with the storyboard of the solution, and you get people to sign up maybe for a sales call. Well, you know what? that's already more than them just saying, because they came to you, they signed up for the sales call or for an email or whatever. There's a small call to action. That's stronger evidence than saying, but it's still very weak. Oh, what could we do? Could we do something stronger? Well, if we're in B2B, what if, let me get out of the way, what if we got them to sign a letter of intent? What if we got the CEO of the potential customer to join a co-creation workshop where he flies over, the CEO flies over, and we actually work together? That's a stronger commitment. Will they buy? Not sure, but the fact that the CEO of a client shows up is already a bigger commitment. Oh, could we do something that's a 5? A whole series of experiments that, either it can be a down payment, it can be a real payment, it could be some things where you just go and, watch them in their plant, how they're actually working. But the point is that we have levels of evidence, okay? So we know we need to go beyond the interviews. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If you just stick to this, people will say, oh, they're going to try to test the whole idea. But remember, I showed you there are pieces to test. You test the needs, you test willingness to pay, you test the solution. So what you really want to do is break this down and have evidence for the different aspects. So evidence here for desirability. Do I have evidence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for desirability? Then we go to feasibility. Do I have evidence level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? And same for viability. So it's almost that we create a scorecard for each idea. Now, to make it concrete, when a team presents, and I talked to you about the Honeywell Growth Symposium, each team is not just going to present the idea, they're going to present their scorecard of evidence. And it's the scorecard of evidence that's going to give the leadership confidence. So the idea per se, you can't judge if it's good or bad. You can only judge, do we have evidence that shows it's an idea that is worth investing in? And you do this gradually. So at the beginning, you might have a 0 everywhere. That's okay. Last, the thing I show sometimes to make it concrete, if you compare Lego Friends to Lego movies, when Lego started to invest in Lego movies, all of it was actually 0. They didn't know anything. They didn't know how to make a movie. They didn't know if the brand would work. So they start from scratch. When you take Lego Friends, which were playbox for girls, feasibility, they had level 5 from the start. They didn't need to run experiments because they had the supply chain. So we're already starting at a 5. So you can see, you can already start to compare ideas. Which one is riskier? Which one is less risky? But the point here is that we don't stick to abstract stuff or our opinions. We stick to more objective evidence. So that is the theory or the technical part where we get very geeky around these things because we know that we need to get to the metrics. It's not a feeling. Innovation is actually a process, a growth project. And then we start to build playbooks around it. So there's a little bit of a very concrete content that we kind of give away. We put them out there on slides, is the playbooks that we then use to try to get people to the next level to actually doing this in an organization.
Man, I have PTSD now. So it reminded me of my first career, which was in a media company where I was head of transformation or digital transformation. And I was constantly coming up with ideas. And the CFO would always kill them by asking me to do a business plan. And of course, I'd make it up, finger in the air, no idea even how to do any of this. And back then, I told you that's when I discovered your work on the business model canvas. I tried that, but this is the business model canvas evolved and on steroids in a way. But I just wanted to go, okay, so you're in any company. Now, I know it might feel different if you're in a services company or a business or a physical product company. But if you're somebody in Sector 7G and you have an idea, what usually happens is you try and get somebody with authority to listen to you. Or you might be lucky or a bit more evolved where you might have one of those spark boxes where you can come up and suggest an idea. But usually they don't go anywhere. So take us through somebody starting there. Because you worked with these people, you've helped these people, you've actually helped people get all the way through the gates but also decide to actually just kill the project in the first place.
Yeah. So there's a bit of a tricky one there, right? Because if you're in what you said, sector G7, wherever you are.
That's where Homer Simpson's office was, sector
Okay.
7G.
Okay, got it. But so the problem is you're actually starting from a difficult point, because if the company doesn't already understand, you evaluate and invest differently in growth projects for a future that we don't know compared to execution projects. If the leaders don't know, you're already a little bit on a lost kind of track, right? Because they're going to think in the exploit world. So the first tactic I'd say is try to get them to understand that in an explore world, we don't know if it's going to work. We have to be honest. We do not know. And then you show them, the best thing we can do is not a spreadsheet, because a spreadsheet is a fantasy. What I did is I started to collect evidence. So here's this process where we get more and more evidence, and based on the evidence, we should invest. So you do need to get them into a frame that how is working in explore different from exploit? Because what you need to understand, I do this with leaders all the time, but it's the same if you're not the leader making the decisions. You need to realize in 90% of the companies, everybody's in an exploit mindset. So if you don't take them out of the exploit mindset, they're going to evaluate everything with that lens, right? They have the exploit glasses on, so they're going to want a business case. They're going to want, the spreadsheet, for the next 100 years. So what you want to do is say, look, this is not about a business case. I have one. I made this and it looks great. But what's more important is I'm now on track to find the evidence that this business case could work. So you need to bring them out of the exploit mindset to show how exploration works. That's the tough part. So sometimes if you're in that little box, you can't get leaders to think like that. But some actually naturally are inclined to think like that, but nobody's ever told them to think like that. I know a ton of CEOs, I get to work with a ton of leadership teams. I just start with, here's how explore works, here's how exploit works. And then they immediately realize that's why none of our projects work, because we try to pick the right idea. We had a great business case, and then we poured 10 million or 100 million on the project. That doesn't work. That works in the exploit world. So that's the starting point. That's the unfortunate part when you're at the bottom of the pyramid.
I love the line that your mentor and friend of the show, Steve Blank, has: exploitation pays your salary, exploration pays your pension. I absolutely love that. It's at the start of Lead and Disrupt, Tushman and O'Reilly's book. But that is a huge thing. The last thing before we go on to evolve the idea a little bit further is the lessons there. So you talked about earlier on the move from books to playbooks. One of the biggest and saddest things, I think, particularly in the age of AI, is that we didn't read enough anyway. We didn't evolve our lenses anyway to add new lenses when the world changes. So we're stuck with the lenses we have. The business schools are teaching models. Now, it's getting better. I know, for example, your work, for example, is taught in Trinity College, business school where I am, extensively. Now, it's getting better, but there's still a lot of leaders in companies who have been taught, if at all, for the way of exploitation. And the world has changed dramatically. And the metrics they use to measure that are so different than the metrics needed for exploration or new ideas. Maybe just a word on that, because that, for example, is a huge thing. So you talked about lenses there, but the lenses plus the metrics, of course,
yes,
many ideas don't make it through the gates because they're measured so badly.
Yes. But so a couple of things there. The biggest challenge is indeed what you say, is that established companies are trimmed to execute. And you know what? That's actually a good thing, because they have to. And if you're a publicly listed company, well, your first thing is you need to really fight for the survival of that company. So you can never neglect execution. So that's why when people say, oh, everybody needs to be an innovator, I say, absolutely not. You need to run the company. And that is a big task, right? It's like the execution pays the salaries. So what we need to have now is an education for leaders that shows them they need a dual mindset. They need to actually think explore and exploit. the 19th century, CEO, if I may go all the way back, that was an exploit CEO because better processes to run the company was the differentiator, right? Today, the real differentiator is the ability to constantly transform. So if you look at the companies that are at the top of the pyramid today, the best performing companies, it's those that constantly reinvent themselves. So they're world-class at running the business and they're world-class at reinventing. So, the usual suspect is in Amazon. But now if you look at the AI companies, which ones are surviving? Those that can reinvent themselves faster than the others. So that is the key. And it's not fully taught yet. But the worst thing is that today we have, heads of strategy and growth or heads of innovation that have never done it before and that have not gone through that education. So sometimes CEOs or leadership teams put people in place who they're good with technology. Well, guess what? That does not equip you with being a growth leader. Growth is something that has processes and ways of doing. And the good news is we now know how to do it. So let's educate ourselves on how it's being done. And let's put people in place who've done it once or twice, right? So I still see major corporations. I will not name names, but they put people in place who don't know. And then they call us and they say, Alex, can you tell us? So we tell them. And then instead of, working with us so we can help them, they go and do it themselves. And then they realize, oh, shoot, didn't work. And then they come back to us because, we've done this 100 times. We're not smarter. We've just done it so many times that we're able to formulate how to do it from the leadership level. That's what we call governance, all the way down to the team level, which is the process. Process is the easiest part. The bastion that we now need to win over is the leadership. And that means we need to get the boards to hire already the right CEOs, because some CEOs, they don't know once they know they will do it. But some CEOs are very stuck in, an execution mindset. And it's going to be very hard to turn them into what I like to call the entrepreneurial leader. And you don't have to be a Jeff Bezos to be an entrepreneurial leader. Bracken Darrell of Logitech was a very entrepreneurial leader without having been an entrepreneur. He's been a corporate person forever, but he has that entrepreneurial CEO mindset, and that's a dual mindset. Exploit and explore at the same time in harmony.
I remember Gary Hamel used to say this, that, in the way the world is today, the business environment, you need the entrepreneurial leader. Ideally, if it was somebody who actually did be an entrepreneur in the past, but failing that, at least learning new things, learning new tools, learning new lenses. Just a word on the head of innovation who doesn't have the training. I see this all the time. I was that person, and actually it's led to this brilliant journey that I've been on to learn, because when I was head of innovation for the national broadcaster here in Ireland, I did a lot of good things, but they were all low-level things. They were all, you know what, it didn't really matter if they happened or not. They were kind of innovation theatre, but I actually thought they were good. But then as I've learned more and more, and I realized so much more content is out there, I realized how little I knew. And actually it's why I do the show and why I try and democratize this knowledge and share it with the world, much like you do. But it's to help almost the inner child, young Aidan, and go, here, reach out and help people like me in the past, because actually they don't know what to do and they weren't taught what to do. And often you're put into that position because your personality is right, you're entrepreneurial, you have great ideas. None of that is innovation. It's highly, highly disciplined. And that's the biggest lesson I had. And when I work with organizations myself, I'm telling them that's the type of person you want you want in the role. It's almost like the shift to data-based marketing. You want a marketer that, has great ideas and knows good brand and knows good from bad, but actually can measure the life out of things, because actually that's the discipline.
And that's, again, the ideas are the easy part, right? How to make that work is why we came up with playbooks also. Because the other thing is that nobody has time for training. Everybody's under huge pressure. Big corporations, small corporations, they have to deliver. There is very little time to learn. So what if you could package things in a way that learning is a byproduct? Because, some people are passionate about learning per se, but at the end of the day, when you have a job, learning is just, a means to an end. So what if you can get to those skills? That got us really passionate about playbooks. And, one playbook was explicitly on how do I know if I should invest in a project or if I should kill a project. Like how risky is that still? Those are things that are technical that you can easily make the playbook for.
Okay, man. Well, we're going to take people out of your misery. Young Aidan, not that young, 20 years ago, Aidan. I'm going to reach back and go, here you go, man. Here's a playbook. So Alex is going to teach you and hopefully help many other heads of innovation that listen to the show.
Okay, I'm going to show you a quick playbook. Let me just switch here on my screen, see if I can make it happen. So we developed a playbook library where you have a ton of playbooks, because all of these are things you need to know as, head of growth and strategy, etc. So it's a library that you get access to. Now, the playbook that we started to look at, I just prepared this. I made a project here for the innovation show, and we just look at a playbook. So playbook is basically a step-by-step approach that tells me a little bit, what to do, just like I did now. But then you immediately do it, right? So say, do, say, do, say, do all the time. So here I have one on how market ready is your project. So that's an assessment I can go through. So first one here is, okay, navigating risk and uncertainty. This is a video that, first you watch and you get a little bit of the stuff I just told you. So you do need to learn a bit, but the point is you don't learn for too long. You immediately go and apply. So what I mean with that is apply. Well, first, what if we had a little theory thing? So in this case, I clicked on the second step, and the second step brings us to an exercise. But then we want to go as fast as possible to our own project. So here, just so we understand, let's take these Amazon projects and put them on a scale from explore to exploit. Is this a new idea? We have no clue if it's going to work. Or is this managing the existing business, right? So pretty straightforward, start to offer Amazon Web Services, launch the Amazon Kindle, open new distribution warehouses. You can already see innovation is everywhere, but this is much closer to exploit. It's going to be much easier to open a new warehouse than to start Amazon Web Services. So guess what? Amazon did not say, hey, give me a business case and I'm going to invest in the business case. They said, okay, the business case could be interesting. Let's try it out. So they started to experiment, right? So now, if I go back and I show you just exactly what I told you theoretically, we can do it practically. So I showed you levels of evidence. Okay, so let me scroll down here somewhere further down after I map my idea. I have a step 6 here that's called assess and score the customer evidence that I have. So I click on this step, and it immediately asks me to score the evidence for my customer. So let's say here, I put up a sticky note, I'm selling to innovation leaders. Okay, that's my first customer segment. Now, I need to show the evidence that I have level 1, what people say, level 2, 3, 4, 5, that shows the needs that they have. So, you know what? I actually, after the show with Aidan, I talked to 10 innovation leaders, 10 interviewees, okay, said they have this problem. Or let me make it more realistic and say 5 out of 10. So I start to collect the evidence that I have. So right now, I'm just collecting the evidence, showing the evidence that I have, that I understand my first customer segment, innovation leaders. And if I cannot show that evidence, I haven't done my homework yet. So I shouldn't even start to think about the solution because, I need this. So as a project doer, I need to collect the evidence on customers first. As a leader, I need to ask the team, hey, you're starting to work on the solution. Do you have evidence that you understand the problem the customer needs? So you go back and push them back to show me the evidence. So the key word here is show me the evidence on a scoring level from what people say, reactions to artifacts. Oh, I just made a mistake, right? Because I said that I talked to 10 people, 5 said they had this problem. Did I actually show them something very concrete, an artifact that they could react to? No. So the leader just asked me, right? Well, you know what? Then it's actually level one evidence because I didn't show them a concrete situation. Oh, when you were in this context, did you know in which projects to invest or not? So I just caught myself giving myself a level two score when it was actually a level one, right? So you can start to have an objective conversation based on these levels. So you move away the conversation around evidence away from, I think this is a great idea, to, well, what's your evidence? And what score does that evidence have? So now the whole thing is less about leader's opinion versus the team's opinion. It's the team's evidence for the customer versus does the leader believe you that that evidence is strong enough? And now, of course, you'll always have leaders that will say, well, I don't really care what your evidence is, but then you just have a bad leader, right? The best leaders will start to have an evidence-based conversation. So this was just scoring around the assessment of the evidence for customers. So then you do the same for the solution, you do the same for willingness to pay, but we just walk you through kind of going through collecting that evidence and giving it a score. So we make it ultra practical from a very technical thing away from educating you, from getting you to do it on the spot. Because this is, again, it's not rocket science. We're not doing surgery. We're scoring an idea. So this is what our idea of playbooks is, getting people to do it, to work on their project, not fictional stuff, on the spot. So at the end, you have a score of where your project is today. So that's just an illustration of a playbook.
Absolutely love it, man. I love it. I was thinking about how we had Timo Vuori and Kui Hui on the show talking about Nokia's reinvention and how Nokia moved into the networks business. And what they said essentially was the whole company, firstly, they'd psychological safety where it was okay to call out a bad idea or a good idea. But more than that, they moved towards a data-based approach to things. And I always think of that brilliant line, one of my favorite lines ever, Upton Sinclair. It's difficult to get a man to understand something when their salary depends on not understanding it. This takes that out of it. I mean, this makes it totally data-based. Yeah. And the big thing is, I often think about this, you're in a room, ideas are presented, maybe it's a brainstorming session. The leader makes it very, very clear which ideas they prefer. And to go against that and to be the person who goes, sorry, boss, I just think it's a terrible idea. They're going to keep receipts on that and they remember you. And I've seen this happen where in the hallway afterwards getting coffee, the leader's like, yeah, Aidan was very negative in that meeting, wasn't he?
Here's the thing that gets really interesting, right? Because those are real aspects that we're dealing with. But, let's take a session like this where one leader might say, well, we have the evidence that customers care. Well, what I say, and it's a bit harder for an internal person, is to say, okay, well, tell me what that evidence is. Well, we just know. Okay, so what I'm going to capture here is Mark said in the meeting on this date that we know. And then it's on the line, right? So just because he said we know. So it's okay. It's okay to proceed without evidence, but it needs to be explicit. Because I'm not dogmatic. If you want to do projects with zero evidence, be my guest. If you have the money to waste, that's okay. And sometimes you need to go fast, so you're going to take a risk, right? But it needs to be explicit. Are we investing based on evidence, or are we investing based on faith, right? So when you get leaders to have to put their name on it, we just know, I believe it's going to work in an evidence-based world. It's going to get very tricky, and they usually backtrack very, very quickly.
Fantastic. And I led with the idea of the cat, Alex, Oscar the cat, jumping up on beds. If companies want to reach out to you and Strategyzer to come and jump on their projects and let them know if they've got a hope or not, where's the best place for them to find you and the playbooks?
Everything's available on the website. Just go to Strategyzer.com. You can Google my name also. You'll end up with Strategyzer. We put a lot of stuff out there. So typically we make the theory, the concepts accessible because we want it to spread. For those of, who don't want to kind of figure out on their own how to apply it, they just go and have a look at the playbooks or get to talk to us. So we're really in that, we're passionate about getting people to work the right way.
Author of The Invincible Company, Testing Business Ideas, High Impact Tools for Teams, Value Proposition Design, and the Business Model Canvas. And there's a business book for kids that Alex especially wrote for his own kids, which I also have a copy of, which I haven't pulled it out yet. They're not quite there yet, Alex, but they certainly will be. They'll be sick of me. They'll be going through all these canvases to validate ideas. But always a pleasure to have you on the show, and we'll be back. Just let's give a little preview of what we'll be back next week to talk about, Alex.
I'd really love to talk about value propositions. Big theme, and not a lot of companies get their value propositions right.
Author of Value Proposition Design, our next episode, Alex Osterwalder. Thank you for joining us. Just to let you know, you can win a copy of one of Alex's books just by signing up to the Kindle Institute, kyndryl.com/institute. Just send us a screenshot, let us know that you did sign up, and you will be in with a chance to win a copy. With a unique blend of AI-powered consulting built on unmatched managed service capability, Kyndryl helps leaders harness the power of technology for smarter decisions, faster innovation, and a lasting competitive edge. You can find out more about Kyndryl and the Kyndryl Institute at kyndryl.com.